do I do the right thing? That's the big question, isn't it? I think that as someone who spends a lot of his time thinking about ethical questions and issues around morality, and just becoming a better human, I guess, it's very easy for me to become distracted by these grand universal principles and broad ethical rules and guidelines that are all kind of abstract in a way, and lose sight of the fact that what really matters is the choices, the decisions you have to make in real life, in the moment. The point with ethics and morality really isn't just to imagine what it means to be a good human being. It's to apply what you've learned by asking these kinds of questions in the real life situation. It's not about imagining in ideal terms a good life. It's about living a good life. Now, that means that what is the right thing to do? How do I do the right thing? That is an urgent question that presents itself day to day in the most banal situations. But it's a real question. It's not an abstract, ideal discipline like ethics tries to make it. It's about actually doing the right thing in a way that affects your life and the lives of others. Now, as many of you know, most recently, doing the right thing has become, really the main thing I think about day to day. Because not just from a moral point of view, I have to think about these things because it's part of my mission in life, but because I have to make some very tough choices every day. Now, for some of you who might not have been following The Great Everything for a long time, this is a quick recap. I'm a former banking lawyer in a elite international law firm in London, who at one point in his career, quite recently, saw the light, as I like to put it, and quit to pursue virtue and knowledge. That's something that I like to call it that way because it's from Dante, the pursuit of virtue and knowledge, and it's something that matters to me. The idea that I have to become a better human being, and that means collecting as much knowledge, but also trying to do the best I can in real life situations, and then sharing what I learn along the way with you guys. That's what I do now. And at some point along the way on this new path I was embarking on after law, I got derailed by some real life circumstances. 3 months ago, my mother was diagnosed with a very aggressive brain cancer, and so I had to abandon my new course and the country I was in to travel back to Rome to be by her side and be her full-time carer, which is what I've been doing for the past 3 months. And of course, this situation, the gravity of it, has meant that hard decisions have been a daily thing with me. And so I just wanted to involve you in that. I wanted to share with you the decisions I've had to take and the rationale and my thinking around these questions of doing the right thing. And that's what I want to talk about. When I found out my mother has brain cancer, the first tough decision I had to make, but by no means the hardest, was what to do with my life. Because as you know, as I keep mentioning, before all this, I'd already made a very big and tough decision. The decision to abandon my career, just give it all up, give up the money, the salary, the success, give up my whole life really, to pursue this dream of becoming a philosopher. And a dream that many consider crazy, a choice many in my life consider crazy, still to this day. But it's a choice I made, and it was a tough one. But then, when I'd started this whole new path, and this nuclear bomb of my mother's brain cancer exploded under everyone's ass, well, then there was a big question. Do I stay the course on this new, exciting path, following my dream? Or do I turn my back on this too, to do my quote-unquote duty and be by my mother's side? And it was a tough decision, but it was only a tough decision in terms of the sacrifice it involved. It wasn't tough in the sense that it was a genuinely hard thing to decide what to do. There was never any real question of what I would end up doing. The pros and cons, not that I ever really considered them logically, but the pros and cons are obviously stacked in favor of coming and being by the side of the most important person in my life. And this is the person who literally gave me my life. So there was no way I was ever going to abandon my mother, right? But I think that if you look at it from a purely cynical point of view, from a selfish point of view, because ultimately the choices you make, they're not just about self-sacrifice, they're also about doing the right thing for yourself. And I think that in very difficult situations, a valuable heuristic, or maybe just a little rule of thumb, is the minimization of future regret, i.e., choosing the thing that is less likely or least likely to be regretted in the future, whether it goes well or not. So this is something that you can apply to big and grave decisions like this one, but also smaller ones. The idea of which am I most likely or least likely to regret. So I see these best case and worst case scenarios, right? Say I decide, fuck it, my mother, I'll go visit, of course, and I'll call her every day, but I'm going to stay and do this philosophy thing, and it goes terribly. Obviously, I'm going to regret the choice one day of not being by my mother's side, because I abandoned her for what? But let's say it goes amazingly. I become rich and famous, as most philosophers are. Very rich philosopher, that's a classic, isn't it? So I'm a rich and famous philosopher. 90 years old, I've had an amazing life. Everyone loves me. I've got groupies, like so many philosophers have. Groupies all over me. And I look back at the day I decided, nah, fuck it, my career is more important, and I abandoned my mother. That will be something that, as a moral person, I could never live with. I couldn't face myself knowing that that is something that I did. How could anyone ever trust me? How could anyone ever give me themselves as a lover, as a member of my family, knowing that one of the most important people in my life needed me, and I turned my back on them? Despite the fact that, I helped out, I visited, but visiting, what is that when someone's battling cancer? That's nothing. Your son, your only son, decides to stay away. So that future regret would be something that I just couldn't live with. But on the other hand, think of the worst case scenario. I decide to come and help my mother and stay with her, and because of that, my whole life professionally is a failure. Because of that, romantically, it will also be a failure. So now I'm 70 and I'm kind of poor and mediocre in terms of, my prospects. And I look back at my life, and life has just been a life of failures and disappointments and that. And I think to the time, the crossroads, when I chose to help my mother. Yeah, part of me might say, well, who knows what would have happened had I stuck to my original plan. But I'm sure that the most important and most powerful and the majority side of me would look back at it with a smile and think that, in this life of failure, that wasn't a failure. That was genuinely a good thing that I did. And I deserve to be proud of that. So minimizing future regret, I think as a rule of thumb in big decisions, that's one to keep in mind. Another somewhat more difficult decision I had to make in relation to my mother's brain cancer was how to proceed with initial treatment. And it ultimately boiled down to a question of length of time versus quality of time. And the situation was thus. So my mother has a glioblastoma grade 4, which is one of the most aggressive and vicious tumors you can have. And it's incurable because it's highly recurrent, which means that it comes back even if you are lucky and you remove the whole tumor. And in her case, it was also inoperable because her tumor was so vast and so awkwardly placed that surgery was just not very advised. In fact, we spoke to a number of surgeons on this, and they all said that there was a degree of risk in surgery, in the sense that, yeah, they could open her up and try to remove some of the tumor, but there was a chance that she would be impaired as a result of the procedure itself, i.e. there was a chance, a risk, that she would have some form of motor function loss or a loss of cognitive abilities. There was that risk. The percentage of risk varied depending on which surgeon we spoke to. The most optimistic said 5%, the most pessimistic said about 25%, but there was a risk. And the reward was that, okay, they can remove some of it, not all of it, just 50% tops of the tumor, which would buy you some time. Of course, the quality of that time was a big question mark, because part of it would be spent simply recovering from an incredibly traumatic and invasive procedure, brain surgery. And of course, The fact is that you might spend most of that or the whole extra time you bought as a vegetable. So it was what I would call high risk, low reward, or at least question mark reward. The second option was standard cancer treatment, chemo and radiotherapy, which if you have ever had cancer or known someone who has it or has had it, you know that it's a very traumatic process. Cancer treatment is devastating, almost as bad as the disease itself. It's a journey of horror and despair and pain and depression. So there was that, and the chances were it wouldn't do much because my mother's cancer was so progressed. And then there was the third and final solution, which was do nothing. Do nothing because, of course, why make her suffer longer than she has to? She's doomed. She's going to be gone in a few weeks because it's such a mercifully fast-acting cancer. So why put her through the pain of an extra month of life that is chemo and radio, that is just horrible? Just don't put her through that. Just do nothing. So that was the decision that I had to make. I applied my whole sort of thinking toolkit, but also the minimizing future regret that I spoke of in the last segment. And in this case, what that looked at like is thinking back as an old man to not doing anything. I feel that would always feel a bit like I gave up. But also, imagine one day encountering or hearing about someone who was in a similar condition to my mother's and who did do something and managed to buy some real time or maybe even come out of it. Imagine how that would feel, knowing that you did nothing and lost a chance. So I decided we've got to try something, at least try. Surgery, I discounted because too high risk for a reward that was just not really worth it. Okay, buy some time, but what if it's not a lot of time? And even if it is a lot of time, it's spent in a wheelchair. Is that worth it? No, I'm not going to play with my mother's life like that. So chemo it was. So I looked at my mother and said, look, this is going to be horrible and it's going to be tough, but I'll be there with you for it. And I promise you, if there aren't any results or minimal results, which is likely, I won't put you through any more treatment. I'll just let you go. Don't worry. And we did it. That's what we did. And it worked. This month, we found out that chemo and radiotherapy have reduced her brain tumor of 85% in terms of mass. An incredible result, completely unexpected. So that decision has paid off. And minimizing future regret also came in handy. And just thinking about it logically. So this is very good news, the first good news that I've had since the beginning of this whole horrendous process. Of course, as you'll hear, sadly, it isn't and wasn't the last difficult decision I had to make. Which brings me to the latest tough decision I'm having to make with regards to my mom's condition. I haven't yet made it because it's all very current. It's happening these days. So I told you about my mom's great news from the MRI scan that shows that her brain tumor has reduced by 85%. A result that is wildly unexpected. The doctors were hoping, best case scenario, to halt the progress of the tumor. They weren't expecting a reduction, let alone such a significant reduction. But of course, as I mentioned, glioblastoma is recurrent, which means that even when it's entirely removed, it's almost 99% case scenario that it's going to come back anyway. So you're not out of the woods ever with a glioblastoma. So it doesn't mean much, but it does mean one thing. It means that, you can't count her out yet. Sure, statistics say that the glioblastoma will grow again, it'll come back, it'll always come back, and that you've got 6 months to live tops. But that's just statistics, right? Just like an average is just an average. There are cases that are above average and below average. And with statistics, there are numbers that are beyond the statistic. What I'm saying is, this is by no means certain or even likely. But if my mother was one of those people who beats the statistics, this is what she'd be behaving like. This is the kind of result we'd see. Now, the result doesn't mean she will beat the statistic. Imagine this, you've got two ships that are leaving from Liverpool to reach New York. And one of them makes it, and one of them sinks halfway there. A quarter of the way there, the ships are going in the same direction. And you would look at them both and say, well, at this point, there's still a chance that they will both make it, even though one of them sinks. So my point is that the result shows that you can't count her out quite yet. It is a result that is compatible with her making it, or at least having a longer life than the doctors expect. However, not all is good in the Garden of Eden, because on New Year's Eve my mother had strong cramps and pains in her lower abdomen, and so I rushed her to the ER in an ambulance, and we stayed there until 5 a.m. on Christmas Eve. Yoo-hoo! And we found that she has another cancer, completely unrelated to her brain cancer, in her lower gut. So now my mother is battling 2 cancers, which is just crazy. This is something I found out yesterday, in fact. And this is the dilemma. The doctor, this is a small tumor at the moment, it's a sarcoma in her lower gut, and it's still in its early stages, so it'll take a while to get her. The glioblastoma, if it does its job, will get her before. But the doctor, the surgeon, doesn't want to remove this tumor in her gut, because he says that to do it would be incredibly invasive. You'd have to remove part of her gut, a kidney. It would be a very traumatic procedure. It would take a month to recover from. It would destroy her immune system. And for what? Because the glioblastoma is going to take her away in 6 months anyway, long before the sarcoma in her gut has a chance to do any damage. So what's the point in making her suffer through such a horrendous surgical procedure when the glioblastoma is going to get her anyway sooner than that? So that's their logic. And it is a sound logic. But it's only sound if you take that initial assumption as a given, the fact that she's only got 6 months to live. Now, because of her result with the MRI scan, I'm thinking that isn't a given. In fact, those results are compatible with her making it, or at least living a bit longer than those 6 months. In which case, I really do think we should be removing that horrible, horrible sarcoma and the kidney and everything. Let her have her fighting chance. She's earned it by reacting better than anyone expected. She's a tough broad. She's the daughter of a woman who survived Auschwitz, so she's got some tough genes. She earned her fighting chance. Let's give it to her. Let's remove that tumor, that sarcoma, and the kidney. Let her fight. So this is what I'm going to do, I think. I haven't made my mind up yet, but we're going to have an MRI scan in a month to check her brain. And if the results show that this trend with her glioblastoma is still positive, that her brain tumor is still staying within control, then I'm thinking, well, she has a chance. It doesn't mean that she's going to make it, but it means that she isn't out for the count yet. In which case, I'm going to do everything I can to convince that surgeon to remove her lower gut tumor and let her milk that chance.
Patrick, it's Jen here. I just wanted to call in and say thank you so much for sharing that segment, just giving a bit more background about yourself and the challenges you've had, and I want to say as well, sorry to hear about your mum. But I think, it's really great to share how you make those decisions, because I think it's going to be really valuable to so many people. And I definitely haven't been tested in quite as extreme circumstances as yourself, but similarly, a year ago or a bit over, I gave up my company that I'd built originally. I'd made lots of money and decided to pursue my kind of dream, which was also building a new business again, but also giving me a lot more free time to kind of indulge in things like philosophy, and where I could have an impact or make a contribution in the world, which was nothing to do with making any money. And again, the same way I always make my decisions, I have kind of my principles, and one of them is, doing the right thing is always the right thing.
Hey Patrick, I am right here with you, going along with you, listening in to this journey that you're traveling with your mom through her cancer diagnosis and treatment. And sadly, I can relate, because my father was also diagnosed at one point with stage 4 cancer, and it really was incurable, inoperable, and just one of those places that you never ever want your parents to be, or anyone that you care about. For my father, he did choose chemotherapy as well, but found it to be miserable, and in the end he chose to just live out his days the best that he could. So, whatever choice you guys make together is always going to be the right choice, no matter what anyone else says, does, or experiences. So rest well in knowing that.
Patrick, hello. Greetings from County Clare in Ireland. Looking at the title and listening to the beginning of your piece of audio about doing the right thing reminded me of some poetry by Mary Oliver that begins, "You do not have to be good. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves." And I went on then to listen all the way through what you were saying. And you went on to say that the whole issue about what is the right thing to do comes up for you over all sorts of things every single day. And I found myself, as I listened to this, one being in sympathy with that and feeling that I get that. And I thought what seemed to me to be the really big decision, which was, what did you decide to do after your mother was diagnosed? That huge decision. I realized that I don't have any recollection of you describing it as a huge decision. You packed yourself up and took yourself to Rome, and that it was almost like as if it was a no-brainer because you loved your mother. And I thought to myself, well, I wonder if there are some decisions which don't feel like moral decisions, don't feel like ethical dilemmas. They feel almost not as if they're a decision at all.
That's a very interesting question, Paul. Because you're right, it was a no-brainer. There was never any question as to whether I would or wouldn't come to my mother's side in her time of need. And it's true that sometimes these kind of decisions seem like they're made for you in a way, that there are certain moral commitments that are so ingrained in you that it's almost as though you had no choice at all. And it makes me think of something similar in cases that you hear on the news where a hero jumps into a river to save a drowning woman, or the fireman leaps into action. And then these people get interviewed on the news. What were you thinking? And they always seem to say, well, I wasn't thinking, I just acted. It's almost as though their decision-making ability was overridden by the pure instinct to act in a way that in that case is moral. So perhaps there are some cases where the moral commitment is so ingrained that it is beyond choice. It is just who you are. Which I guess means we could take it in a metaphysical direction and start talking about free will. So if you just happen to be the kind of person who would act a certain way, is it really a moral choice? Is that really a choice at all? Is there any ethical value to that? I mean, ultimately, it is through no merit of your own or fault of your own that you happen to be the way that you are, right? There is a chain of causality that is involved in making you who you are that goes all the way back to the Big Bang, and you can't take real responsibility for it, right? Not in a deterministic view of the world. But I think we've talked about free will quite enough here on The Great Everything. So instead of going down that path, I might think about, in these cases where it really isn't even a choice, can we say that you're being moral? Because I've always thought that ethics is about choice. It is the choices you make in the moment that define whether in that moment you have behaved ethically or unethically. So in these cases where it really isn't even a choice, can we say that you're being moral? Maybe there's an answer here in Aristotle's virtue ethics. So his idea of morality is very vast and complex, and so we can't go into too much detail here. But there is an idea that to be a good man, you have to have a certain balance of qualities, and you can train yourself to have or display these qualities. And the ultimate goal is to become a virtuous person. And a virtuous person, the guy who sits at the pinnacle of the ethical pyramid, is the person who is able to act ethically in any given circumstance without having to think about it, because these kind of thoughts and behaviors have become hardwired into who he is as a human being. So maybe within that Aristotelian conception of ethics, doing the right thing because you feel you have no choice is possibly the most ethical thing you can do. I just want to close this open thread that we've been talking about regarding doing the right thing and making big decisions. It's generally navigating our way through those tough choices that we sometimes have to face in our lives. In my specific case, this all relates to the decisions I'm having to make regarding my mother's brain cancer, a situation which really highlights the importance of doing the right thing, because doing the wrong thing will probably kill her. It's a life and death situation. The stakes are really high, and that highlights the importance of doing the right thing. But of course, doing the right thing isn't just something that relates to life and death situations or big monumental life decisions. No, it's relevant to our day-to-day lives, to these small little in-the-moment decisions that we have to make. And stuff like who do I privilege in a certain situation where I have two options to go with one person or the other person? How do I weigh and balance out the pros and the cons of each, and the social consequences and also the emotional consequences that are involved? Or how do I let someone down gently? Should I even do that? Is it okay to lie in the small situation where maybe I've been invited to something and I don't want to go, but I also don't want to let that person down? It's these small things that we encounter every day. Lying is really a big one, because we all have these little lies that we justify to ourselves, and sometimes we are justified in justifying them to ourselves. It depends on the situation, I suppose. But the fact is, we are facing choices, small and big, every single day of our lives. Some might say every moment of our lives. And that's something I find very interesting. How do you make the right decision in the moment, in every little choice that you have to make? Because hopefully that should be our objective, right? To be able to make the right decision in every circumstance. And of course we'll fail. We will fail. But at the end of the day, what matters is to be able to weigh it all up on a scale and say, on a balance, the majority of my decisions were good, were correct, and they were coming from a good place, and the exceptions can be justified or just understood within the context of the fallibility of humankind. And of course, doing the right thing, even the small things, the big things, it's not always just about ethics. I mean, it's hard enough to do the right thing when you know what the right thing is, because sometimes maybe doing the right thing involves a sacrifice you don't want to make. But what if you don't know what the right thing is? Well, then you have to apply all sorts of different decision-making tools to understand it, to unearth it, to give birth to the truth, as Socrates would put it. Logic can help. Logic is an excellent tool to be able to understand what is right. Sometimes even just understand what you think is right, or what you really want. That's also a difficult thing to unearth at times. And what do you follow? Do you follow your gut, your instinct? Do you follow your reason? All these are just big decisions. What if you can't tell the difference? You can't tell your gut and your reason apart. How do you choose then? This is the kind of thing I really want to be talking about more and more, because I think this is what you might call practical philosophy or practical ethics. It's not about the grand principles. It's about the actual decisions that are relevant to our lives in the moment, day to day, small and big. So one thing I'd like to do more of is have you guys call in and discuss with me big, small decisions, dilemmas that you've faced or are facing, and we could go through those together. What are the best ways to look at that situation to find the best possible outcome? And it doesn't have to be something big. It can just be a tiny thing, like who do I take to the prom? Not that I think most of you who listen to this probably don't go to proms anymore, unless you are probably breaking some laws. But the point is, it doesn't have to be a big thing. It has to be something, though, where you are slightly undecided and you're not sure what the right thing is, or maybe you do think the right thing is, but there's a question mark there. Why don't you call in? Let me know about that. And that's not just something I'm talking about for a show. I'm talking about doing that regularly, because this is something I find fascinating. Is there a life decision that you're facing, that you're struggling with? Is there some kind of dilemma, the social, with friends, relationship that you're dealing with? Share. Let me know. Let's talk about it. Arrivederci.
Can you dig it?
Reese from Medicine Remix, obviously a huge fan of the show.
Can you dig it?
Please, please, please go ahead and do that series.
Can you dig it?
The podcast you just heard was recorded with Anchor. If you want to make your own, download the Android or iOS app completely free from anchor.fm/podcast. That's anchor.fm/podcast.